Today we're going to talk about the 7 worst foods for joint pain and arthritis, and then I'm going to go right into the foods that you should eat for arthritis and joint pain. And I am going to touch mostly on osteoarthritis, but also rheumatoid arthritis and gout. And I've had so many old injuries in the past that these old injuries can definitely haunt someone the older that they get. So arthritis and inflammation is a very important thing on my mind. So I'm always diving into this topic, and I found something that I want to share with you that is extremely interesting. I just have to give you a couple little basics on some words that I need to define. The first one is a chondrocyte. What is that? It's a cell that makes up your cartilage, okay? So when we're dealing with joint pain, it's important to kind of dig into what makes up a joint and study that. And knowing this information could potentially completely resolve your arthritis pain. What did I find? Well, when I was studying these chondrocytes and how inflammation develops, there's always this reference to this term right here. And before I tell you what the term is, it's something in your cells as a part of the assembly line to help make certain things. And this particular thing in your cells has a job of folding proteins. It's just like you would like folding a paper airplane, right? You have to fold it in a certain way so it'll work. Same thing with your cells. Deep inside, you have this little factory that is manipulating different amino acids to make different proteins in a certain shape. And that thing is called you ready for this? Endoplasmic reticulum. It's a part of the factory in your cell that folds proteins so you can use them. It also has a function of storing calcium. And what was interesting to me is that you have a lot of different things that can happen in the cell. You have a lot of different parts, but they kept bringing up this particular part of that factory having stress that originates the cascade of inflammatory events even before mitochondrial damage. And I found that very, very interesting. All right, so just hang with me. There's a couple more pieces of this puzzle, but that's the first one. The second thing that I learned was even more mind-blowing, because in this chondrocyte, there happens to be receptors for bile salts. Now, wait a second, bile salts? That's in your gallbladder. Why do you have receptors for bile in your joints? That didn't make sense to me. I had to kind of go deeply into this for like an hour or two to really wrap my wits around it. But in summary, this is what I found. There's 2 types of bile, okay? You have the bile that your liver makes that helps you digest fat, but you also have another bile called the secondary bile, not the primary, that your microbes help you make from your own bile. So basically, they're not actually making bile, they're just manipulating yours in a way that changes them to create other functions in the body that go way beyond just digestion, the digestion of fats. So in other words, there's other important functions of bile salt. And one function is acting as a potent anti-inflammatory in your joints. So apparently some of these bile salts get into your blood and they go to different parts of the body, like your joints, and help protect the joint. And they help reduce inflammation, which is very, very interesting. When I was in practice, I know when people had their gallbladders out or they had some antibiotic, they nearly always got some type of arthritis or joint pain. So it got the wheels spinning on that topic. But then I remembered TUDCA. What is TUDCA? TUDCA is a very specialized bile salt, and it's a supplement that people take. But I had no idea until I looked it up that one of the unique things about TUDCA is that it reduces this ER stress, this endoplasmic reticulum stress. As a very unique benefit, this bile salt reduces stress on the endoplasmic reticulum. And so now it started to make more sense that basically the bile is not just reducing inflammation, it's actually helping the factory that actually is repairing and maintaining and building your joints, because this is a real key part of that process. And so this connection of the bile is super important in protecting this part of the cell machinery, and also to keep the inflammation out of this right here. Because if something happens with that bile and you're deficient and you get more of this endoplasmic stress, then what happens as a cascade of events, you start getting mitochondrial stress, and now we have a breakdown of this whole apparatus. And also calcium is involved because apparently this little endoplasmic reticulum has another function of storing calcium. So you can imagine when we're talking about joints, we're also talking about preventing calcification. So that's just something new, a very foundational thing. I'm going to relate this to the worst foods for arthritis and then also the best foods, so you can then have enough of these from the diet and know how to control that and reduce your arthritis or inflammation in your joints. And maybe you've heard of the gut-brain axis, okay? Well, there's a gut-joint axis as well. And that's where I got the information from. I will share that in the link down below if you want to learn more about it. But apparently these bile salts are potent anti-inflammatory. And I'm talking about the bile salts that come from your own microbes making them. Wild. And just since we're on the topic of bile, I want to touch just more on this TUDCA, which is a different type of bile salt. It's actually bear bile, and they don't take it from bears anymore. They make it synthetically. This bile is very potent in shutting down inflammatory signaling molecules in arthritis, which is this right here. I don't want to give you more complex words. Just realize that TUDCA helps shut down inflammation very potently with all types of arthritis. Now let's touch on another key piece of the puzzle, which is vitamin K2. Maybe you've heard of vitamin K1, which has to do with clotting. And some people take a medication called warfarin, which blocks vitamin K1 so they don't clot as much. And so they're preventing heart attacks. So that's vitamin K1, but vitamin K2 does something slightly different. It prevents calcium from building up in the soft tissues. If you are deficient in vitamin K2 for some reason, you may get calcification in the joints or the arteries, possibly, or even osteophytes, which are little spurs that can happen around the joints. One interesting thing about people that are on warfarin, one of the side effects is not only the blocking of vitamin K1, but also the blocking of vitamin K2. It won't work. And this is why one of the side effects of warfarin is increased calcification of your soft tissues in the joints and in the arteries. I mean, it's pretty wild that you're taking warfarin for the heart with the side effect of having it create calcification in the blood vessels around the heart. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. But what you should know is vitamin K2 is in foods that are higher in fat. So when we get to the diet part, I'll explain more on that. But this is a really key vitamin to keep the calcium from building up in the joints and reducing inflammation. Now let's talk about RA, rheumatoid arthritis. This is an autoimmune disease where your own immune system is attacking itself. So we have these antibodies that are against our own joints, and that keeps the joint in a constant state of inflammation. I'm not going to give you any more new words with the immune system, but it's going to be an imbalance with these two little things right here. And all you need to know is there is a really important vitamin that helps to put the fire out and reduce inflammation, and that is vitamin D. But if you take regular amounts of vitamin D, it might not create a therapeutic effect. In fact, it's probably not going to be. You have to take larger amounts to create this therapeutic effect on the joints, but really you're creating it on the immune system, because rheumatoid arthritis is more of an immune problem than a joint problem, because there's a lot of different autoimmune diseases. Rheumatoid arthritis is just one of them, but it's a problem with the immune system. So as far as the amount of vitamin D you would have to take, I would take at least, at the very minimum, 20,000 IUs, but probably 30 or 40. I'm going to put a link down below of maybe a doctor you want to work with if you have rheumatoid arthritis to regulate how much vitamin D you need, and then do other tests to make sure you're doing it correctly. But when you're taking high doses of vitamin D3, you should also take magnesium and zinc and vitamin K2, because they all work together. But this will greatly reduce inflammation in the joint. Whether you have rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis, vitamin D is one of the best anti-inflammatories, especially for in the knees and your lower back, actually in any joint. If you're deficient in vitamin D, your inflammatory signals go way up. Now, when you have arthritis or joint pain, there are things that are triggering it from food, like a food allergy. So we will be talking about that, some of the most common things in the foods. Also, there's advanced glycated end products. That comes from having glucose or sugar with a protein. Basically, when you do high carbs, you're going to get these, and that's going to create this sticky protein that's going to create inflammation. They have found in the joints this certain thing called biofilm, and there's microbes in the biofilm. It's kind of like this slime or this protective glue that has microbes in these little calcium shells, and so your immune system can't find these microbes. Well, guess what? They found some of those microbes are related to your teeth. Yeah. So if you have an old root canal that's infected, and somehow that infection is still there in your gums, and that sits in your gum for a period of time, and that can leak into your lymphatic system, into your blood, and it can go into the joints, and it can go into the arteries, and it can keep you arthritic. But the big new thing that I wanted to share with you today is this microbiome problem. Wow, the importance of your microbiome and your joints is way more significant than actually I thought. So it's something we're going to cover when we talk about the food right now. Okay, so we have the 7 foods that you want to avoid. Now, these are not necessarily just foods, they're ingredients in a lot of foods. The first one is emulsifiers. An emulsifier in a food is something that mixes things up in a way that is very blended. And so you'll see these emulsifiers, like one of them is polysorbate 80. Okay, you'll see these in frozen desserts, creamy dressings. And what they do is they really mess up the microbiome. You remember the microbiome that actually helps you make those bile salts that you need for your joints? Well, there's a high correlation between eating these foods and consuming this and having inflammation in the joints. And I wanted to just point that out and make you aware of that. Let's go to number 2, low-fat soy protein powder. If you look at some of these protein bars, sometimes they'll use soy isolate protein. It's very low fat. It's an industrial protein. And I do know a lot of people who use that protein end up with achy joints, arthritis. Why? Well, because it interferes with the liver. When you don't consume animal protein, and you get your protein from things like soy protein or plant-based protein, you're going to get a very low amount of taurine, if any taurine. Taurine is needed to make bile, okay? So that's one thing that is missing in a vegan diet is taurine. You don't have the primary thing that stimulates the production of bile and the contraction of the gallbladder. You need fat for that. And so people on a low-fat diet, they end up with a deficiency of bile, which can then end up with a problem with arthritis. Now, there could also be residues of hexane, which is a solvent in this soy protein. Now, some people will say, oh, it evaporates, it's not there. But there's no one supervising or regulating that right now, unfortunately. But so it may be there, it may not be there, we don't know. And like I said before, we're not going to get the bile stimulation. Instead, we're going to get this thing that's going to create more inflammation in the area of the liver and the digestive tract, which is going to interfere with the microbes. Number 3, refined seed oils. I want to explain something. When they have done studies on seed oils, they have actually said when they replace the saturated fat with these seed oils, there's an improvement in cardiovascular function and insulin sensitivity. And I'm not denying that. My point is, what type of oil did they use? Did they use the typical oil that people get when they go to a fast food restaurant where it's heated and reheated for days or weeks? Absolutely not. So there are seed oils that are cold pressed, very, very minimal refining. And then you have the typical oil, which is refined, bleached, deodorized, heated to 570 degrees. When you heat those oils, you create byproducts called aldehydes, which create a lot of damage in the joint and in the arteries and also in your mitochondria and in the cells that regulate insulin. So yeah, you can hypothetically say that these oils are fine, but what about the complete picture? What about the byproducts that are created from the heat and the reheating, as well as the aldehydes that are created once these seed oils are embedded into your membranes? Some of these oils, safflower oil, if it's cold pressed, or even the sunflower oil, has a much lower omega-6 fatty acid and much higher monounsaturated fats, just like avocado oil and olive oil. But that's completely different than what most people consume or buy at the store. So this is why, number 3, refined seed oils are very inflammatory, especially for your joints. Okay, number 4, alcohol, especially beer. So beer will turn into something called purines, which then can create problems with gout, and it can create inflammation in the joint. Beer also has carbohydrates, so it's going to create a spike in blood sugar and create inflammation. And it's not just the beer that will create problems with arthritis, the wine and hard liquor, because it messes with your liver, and anything that destroys the liver will cause arthritis, unfortunately. Number 5, casein A1 protein, okay, A1. A2 is less of a problem, but the commercial milk that they sell with A1 is the one that a lot of people have a problem with, and especially if it's condensed into these two things right here, sodium caseinate and calcium caseinate. These are like super concentrated casein A1 protein that is going to flare up your joints, and it's in a lot of the bars. It's a very cheap protein they use that comes from China. So you have that. You also have a concentrated casein A1 protein in cheese, like the American cheese. So you want to avoid these casein conventional powders that they have. They actually put it in infant formula. Probably why children develop allergies to milk, right? Not good. If you're going to do milk protein, it's the A2. If you do sheep cheese or goat's cheese or even cow's milk cheese, you can actually find it A2. It's much much better. But the conventional milk with A1 protein is from grain-fed cows, not grass-fed cows. And if we also compare milk to cheese, like cheese is going to be way more concentrated in that protein, so you'll probably have more of a reaction to cheese than you would milk. All right, number 6, modern wheat compared to some of the ancient grains. You know, I do a lot of videos on wheat, and yes, it's a refined wheat product that'll spike your blood sugars because the carbohydrate in there is a super high glycemic starch called amylopectin A, which not only will spike your blood sugars higher than sugar, it's also highly inflammatory. That's one thing. You also have this WGA, wheat germ agglutinin. That is something that is almost as inflammatory as gluten. It's a type of chemical that attaches to your gut wall and it can create leaky gut. And then we have glyphosate, right? Now, most wheat is not GMO, but they still spray this herbicide, glyphosate, as a drying agent. And you're getting like a lot more of it that way. And if you're exposed to this, not only is this going to affect your microbiome, but it is connected to inflammation. And then we get gluten. Gluten is another protein that humans have a difficult time digesting. The byproducts from gluten can give a opioid-like effect, which kind of numbs the area initially, and then all of a sudden you end up with pain that's delayed. There's just a lot of issues with gluten and arthritis and gluten and inflammation, gluten and thyroid problems. And then of course we have high fructose corn syrup. This is not just sugar. This is an industrial type of synthetic sugar that's higher in fructose that has been known to create a lot of inflammation in your liver and insulin resistance in your liver, which is going to create inflammation directly and indirectly. So there's really no turn-off switch. So people can drink a lot of it without kind of being satisfied. So it's very, very dangerous. So these are the foods to avoid. Let's talk about the foods to eat. Fermented foods. Why? Because when you eat sauerkraut, kefir, Bulgarian yogurt, you are going to build up the microbes that help you make these secondary bile salts. And these secondary bile salts are potent anti-inflammatories in your joints. Second one is healthy fats. Olive oil, avocado oil, fish oils, but also animal fats that are grass-fed are also very healthy. And so is grass-fed butter and grass-fed cheese. Number 3, anything with high amounts of vitamin D3. There's salmon, cod liver, and cod liver oil. But typically you want to get as much sun as you can, but that's not food. So then some people in the winter take it as a supplement. But when we're talking about arthritis, you're going to have to take the therapeutic dosage of vitamin D at the very minimum 60, but shoot for 70 or even 80, or sometimes even a little bit more, depending on what type of condition you have. If you have also an autoimmune problem, you need it high because that's when the magic starts happening with inflammation. Also, make sure you take vitamin K2 and magnesium to offset any problems with that. Of course, omega-3 is going to be in the fish, cod liver oil, very important. And then also the sulfur foods, onions and garlic and cruciferous vegetables, very high in sulfur because the joints like sulfur. And then of course, just make sure you have enough collagen from bone broth because part of that joint is collagen. And if you're just eating, regular meat like hamburger or steak, that has a small percentage of collagen. If we take a look at our body and look at how much protein we have, and then we look at how much collagen we have, we need at least 30% of that food collagen. But when you look at a steak, it's only like maybe 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5% collagen, because people like tender steaks, right? They're not consuming this grass-fed, grass-finished steak that's really hard to eat because you're chewing it all the time. But that's because of the collagen. You might have to get your collagen another way. I already talked about vitamin D, K2, magnesium. I want to just mention, keep your iron low because too much iron can create arthritis. Iron is one of those minerals that it's very hard to get out of the body once you get it in there. So like cooking with an iron skillet is not good. Taking iron supplements is not good, especially if you're not menstruating. If you're a man and you have too much iron, chances are you're going to have a lot of inflammation. And then tut cup. I want to just mention that because that's a really good remedy for arthritis. And now you know why. It's something to help that endoplasmic reticulum stress, as well as protecting the cartilage in the joint. And because TUCA is such a fascinating compound, if you really want to understand all the things it does, you want to see this video right here. Check it out.